What's the nastiest thing you did for money? Share in the comments your story. What is the stupidest thing you have done for money? Enjoy watching. Story 1. I'm an exterminator. I handle a lot of rotting animals and I am too close to large quantities of excrement. Sometimes that excrement is human, because we also do grocery stores near homeless camps. I've had used needles in my bait stations. I've been in an attic that I didn't know had a honeybee hive until I pulled some matted, sticky insulation away, and it was covered in bees. They were just regular honeybees, so I didn't get stung. Honestly, the poor things just seemed as confused as I was. Called a beekeeper to relocate them. Sticky, though, and sweaty. I've unearthed a mummified possum from a shed. When a certain kind of rodenticide gets wet, it smells worse than feces and turns into a soupy sludge. I've then had a rat decomposing in said sludge, and I was left to remove and clean all that sewage smell from the box. Story 2. I worked knock shift at a mental hospital, had a patient toss bedpans full of diarrhea, pee, and menstrual blood clots all over her room. The concoction was dripping from the ceiling, in the window cracks and coating the bedding and bed frame. The walls were painted as well. It was oozing into the large floor vent radiator type thingy, and of course all over the floor and the patient. Approaching her room, looking through the tiny bubble window, she drank from a cup of her pee/blood/clots and then threw it at the window. Story 3, I actually did it for free, by accident. So we were at this expo with my company as an exhibitor, and we brought our own Nespresso coffee machine to keep us going all day. Day 4 comes around. We start the day off with shots. We are in Europe, so don't be too shocked. And before making coffee for myself and a few colleagues, I saw the drip tray was full. So I poured the contents into a paper cup and set it atop the reception desk. I jokingly said to my colleagues that I'd give $20 to anyone who will drink it. I started making the other coffees and handing them to people. Then I made my own and set it atop the desk and walked to the fridge to get milk, then pour a bit into my cup and have a nice, big gulp. I swallow. My eyes widen. I realize what I've just done. I drank from the cup with the drips. I cannot even describe how nasty it tasted. Luckily, Noon noticed, but I excused myself and went to throw up in the restroom. Story 4 worked at a movie theater. I would usually volunteer to handle bathroom stall messes, vomit, and stuff like that because they gave gift cards for doing it. One time there was a stall so bad, I had to take air breaks. It was midsummer, and someone must have been sick and sprayed all over the toilet. I deck how you get so close to the toilet, but miss 80% of it. The worst part was the smell thickening with the humidity. It was like opening an overdoor to check on bread, but instead of buttery bread, the smell was shit. But yeah, 2 $15 coupons to Boston Pizza wasn't the best reward for that. Story 5. I worked as a housekeeper and came into work with a note left for me saying there was a disaster in one of the rooms I needed to clean. It was one of the rooms that had a wheelchair-accessible bathroom. There was a disabled man who did not make it onto the toilet in time, so there was shit all over the floor. Toilet, bathtub, and sink. I think in an attempt to clean himself, he made more of a mess. I never debated walking out of a job as much as that moment. I put on all my PPE and spent a long time scrubbing and cleaning. He left a $50 tip and an apology which made me feel bad since I'm sure it was not on purpose. It was still a pretty shitty day. Story 6. Roughly 10 years ago, I used to work as a technical assistant for a video chat studio. My usual routing would be to log in the girls to the platforms they use, verify equipment they work as intended, PC, webcam, mouse, keyboard, troubleshoot defective equipment, keep in touch with site owners to make sure documents are okay on their end, inventory, administer and buy IT consumables such as printer toners or keyboard, mouses and PC parts, and some unrelated work stuff like bureaucratic work, which include verify documents, IDs, passports for girls outside the country, write IRS documents for every new employee, and assist the manager with whatever she needed. One weekend I was on shift and there were only 3 girls online. Usually that means a super chill day. Later that day, one of the girls accidentally juiced all over the keyboard and it started pressing random buttons. This was a huge issue because I had no spare keyboard for her. I had, but we had a strict rule that girls must receive a specific keyboard that looked minimalist and obligatory wireless, which I did not have at the time. I called the manager to inform her about this, and that stores were closed in the proximity of the studio, and there was no way I could get her that specific keyboard on a short notice. My hope was that she would agree to let me give her a wired keyboard. But no. She asked me to do whatever I can to fix it. I said fine and told the girl to take a break while I try to figure out how to fix it. So I thought to myself that this was going to be easy, and from my experience, juice shouldn't smell that bad, or at all, so I could just use cotton Q-tips and a hair dryer to clean the keyboard's board. IDK WTF she did with her cooch. but the keyboard smelled like weeks-old piss left in the sun. I remember I was constantly gagging and was doing my best not to throw up on it while trying to clean it. I use a whole Q-tip box with sanitary alcohol, not only to fix the keyboard itself, but had to get 8 of that nasty smell. After tilde 2H, I managed to dry and clean the keyboard to the point where it didn't smell anymore, and 90% of keys worked, so she could temporarily use the semi-workable keyboard that day. At the end of the shift, the girl gave me some money for helping her out with this. She probably felt pity after seeing me with red eyes after almost 2 hours of gags. My self-esteem went from 0 to -100 that day, because I never imagined I would have to do such degrading work, even though I knew I was working in a video chat studio. TLDR, I cleaned a keyboard soaked in piss. Story 7. When I was 18, I did door-to-door sales for a well-known satellite TV company. We had to upsell these BS $8.99 protection plans. They graded us on it and wanted 75% or more of the customers to sign up, which isn't realistic. We were told to hide the paper and have them sign up for the protection plan unknowingly, and they can dispute the $8.99 with the company later. It was great money, but I had trouble sleeping at night. Story 8, expressing anal glands on dogs and cats, cleaning maggot-filled wounds, preparing animals for cremation who have been dead for months to years, that the owner decided to dig up. Sometimes they resemble maggoty soup, like the one who left his dead Rottweiler in a garage for weeks during a very hot summer. The ones that are just fur and bones aren't as gross. Draining abscesses never bothered me. It was fun, LOL. Also, preparing and looking at poop under a microscope to look for parasites was fun too. Story 9. Working at a big dairy farm for a week. Basically washing shit all day off the machines so they could keep working and stay hygienic with a brief bit of actual herding and milking. I wore gear to protect myself, of course, but the stuff seeped everywhere, splashing back on you, getting into your eyes, even with glasses. And if you were under a cow when it pissed, you were going to be soaked in piss all day. I smelled like shit badly, but even after showers I still smelled. It was on me for days after. And it was brutal, too. Cows would give birth on the milking machines, and you'd have to pull them out. And if it was a boy, it probably got shot right away. Cows got sick, infected, all this stuff. It was just a horror show. Story 10. I used to drive a truck picking up biohazard and medical waste. It paid good, but was disgusting. The behind-the-scenes of funeral homes, hospitals, vet clinic, labs, body harvesting facilities, medical testing, all have horrifying aspects to it. A lot are morbidly interesting, but definitely numbed me a bit. But to be more specific, the nastiest thing was when a surgery center left their 96G waste container outside during a 3-day storm, went to wheel it out, and it was filled to the top with water, blood, liposuction waste, etc. It was probably close to 700 lbs. I tried pulling it and hit an uneven piece of pavement. The sloshing of the fluids came crashing to my leaning side and the whole thing toppled over. 96 gallons of watered-down blood, piss, shit, and fat that had cooked in the Florida summer heat for a week came pouring down on me and nearly knocked me off my feet. I was drenched from the belly down. I vomited about a dozen times and gagged and dry heaved all the way home, which was a 45 minutes drive, sitting in wet pants, socks, and boots. My boss told me to shower and change and finish the route. I told him to fuck off and to consider himself lucky to have me back tomorrow. Story 11. At the factory I work at. Prior to being an operator, I was an industrial cleaner there, literally sometimes knee-deep in god-awful stuff. At one point, I'm being vague as I can because they are super weird about posting anything on social media. One of the mills used an animal fat-based coolant. So imagine wading around in animal fat with a bucket and a hose from a sucker truck picking out metal and slurping up what in all regards smells like pig shit. Edit to add. You said for money. I got paid for it, so I'd say it counts. Story 12. An extremely old man dropped $300 bills in front of me at the ATM. It fell under his feet and I didn't say anything. After he walked away, I put my foot over it, and when he was out of sight, I took them. I was extremely broke and desperate at the time, basically crashing at friends' houses or cheap hotel rooms if I was able to scrounge up enough money that day, but I've always felt really horrible about it. Story 13. Cleaning an old 1,000-gallon waterfall pond that had a flock of 40 ibis. Use it as a communal toilet for over a decade. The top pond was 3 deep in liquid bird shit that had to be bucketed by hand as mechanical equipment couldn't be used. Close second is collecting animal corpses for scientific studies. Finding, moving, and processing a 3-week-old sea turtle or whale is brutal. Smell sticks to your skin and clothes for days. Story 14, selling condom to a 12-yo kid in my neighborhood. While I was going home from Walmart, I dropped my wallet and a little kid grabbed it. He looked into it and ran behind my back. I didn't even realize anything. The kid gave me my wallet, said, "Mister, is this yours?" I was shocked and thanked to him, but after that was more breathtaking. He asked me if he could get the condom. He was looking kind and gentleman though. I told him I can give it to him if he gave me $5. I'm not a greedy money man, I just wanted to have some fun to BW the kid to find out if he is really gonna pay. He did. He took out $5 from his pocket and paid the money, snatched the condom quickly and ran away. It was hilarious, ASF. Story 15. At my job, I had to do an aquifer pumping test at a former contact lens making factory, and the location was in a terrible part of town, and it was used as a place for drug transactions and for women to be pimped out. A bunch of the monitoring wells had markings on them and leftover tape residue because they were used as dead drops for various purposes. There were hypodermic needles all over the place and little bags of heroin additives. One day when we were walking around the site, we found someone sleeping near our pumps, and when they left behind used needles and condoms. The water we pumped up was slick and black, almost like an oil coming straight from the earth. That being said, when I worked at a Tim Hortons as a teenager, a grown man took a shit in a urinal and I had to clean it. And I think that still takes the cake as the nastiest thing I had to do for money. Story 16. I worked in a group home with 6 disabled grown men in my early 20s. All of the men were nonverbal, violent, and obviously intellectually disabled. One of the gentlemen, by far the most difficult to deal with, had rectal digging as one of his diagnoses. He would quite literally shove his fingers up his ass and try to wipe them on you every time he was taken to the bathroom, or if he didn't get his way, etc. Needless to say, I've had duty smeared on me from head to toe in the year and a half I worked there. One of the other gentlemen obsessively masturbated. I worked incredibly hard to dodge that one. Thankfully, I succeeded. Story 17. We're all whores. The only difference is what we're willing to do for the money. Someone told me that a long time ago, and I have always liked it as a slight justification for my hobby. I've done adult websites for over 20 years now. Would I recommend it? Nope. But it paid for my master's and my PhD. It paid for my kids to get their education, and it's allowed me to see some of the world. From what I hear, it's brought some happiness and pleasure to some men along the way. And if we're not here for a little happiness and pleasure in life, then what are we here for? Life is too short for anything else. Story 18. Spent all day long with a tiny team collecting tires in my tiny ass car. Before anyone asks, we weren't taking them off cars. But an old family property owned by some asshole had tires laying everywhere. My car and us were covered in mud. One person had to lay under tires so we could drive. Found someone who would cut the tires from the rim for free. Then we took those rims to the scrapyard, where we made maybe $12 between 3 people for a day's work. Story 19. I worked as a spicy gymnast during my first year of college. There was a guy who came to the club that was obviously loaded. I wasn't usually working when he was there, but one night I was. He told me that he wanted a dance from me because I looked just like his daughter. This made my soul hurt, but I really needed the money. I got it by calling him daddy and keeping him in the VIP room for the bulk of my shift. Still have guilt for that one, but it was the most money I'd ever made in a day as a stripper. Story 20. My very first job, straight out of high school. I was working for a family friend who ran bingo at different locations around our town with her husband. It wasn't necessarily the work itself that was difficult, but seeing so many elderly people who would come and spend anywhere between $250 $600 plus, AUD mind you, per session was incredibly upsetting, especially seeing that they hardly ever won anything back and many were clearly addicted. The worst memory I have of working with them was this one elderly lady who would bring her granddaughter along with her. She would have been only a few years younger than me at the time, and I distinctly remember overhearing a conversation between them about getting some lunch while they were at the venue, to which the grandmother said, "No, we can't afford to have separate meals. I'll order us an entree to share." This was all of 10 minutes after she had spent $350 on her bingo game. I felt so much guilt over seeing how these people were clearly being taken advantage of with their gambling addictions, and although I knew that the business wouldn't suffer from my quitting, I had to for my own peace of mind. I think all up, I lasted less than 6 months. Story 21. I was an ordinary schoolboy from Russia, and I really needed money. Really. I worked at construction sites, cafes, and many other places, and then one day I come to visit a friend to play the new PS3 Slim. He went to the store. His mother comes into the room and says, "Hey, it looks like you needed money there." I answer her, "Yes, we really do." She says, "Come on. You make me happy, and I will give you money. Well, as a result, I fucked my friend's mother. Story 22. I worked nights in a gas station. We counted the money in the bathroom because it was the only hidden place in our little kiosk. I dropped a loonie and it rolled into the floor drain. I took the cover off the drain and reached into the cold, nasty water and found a handful of coins. I spent the next hour between cars with my arm shouldered deep in the muck in that drain and pulled out a month's worth of wages. After that, I'd check the drain every other Monday night and usually get enough to buy McDonald's for breakfast the next morning. Story 23. Worked at Lamwiston, the source of all McDonald's fries. Specifically in receiving, where trucks of muddy potatoes get backed in, dumped on conveyor belts, then dropped into metal canals filled with water to move them from room to room. This also removes large debris such as rocks and lets the potatoes move quickly. This water is used and reused and given its own gigantic ass sump to get pumped into and reused. The first canals are not watertight and make a constant mess on the ground of water and mud and silt. The whole area is regularly flooded out and is built for it. I would some days need to get into the canals to clear blockage, or would have them overfill and dump mud all over me. Like 18 an hour to play in the mud with spuds and put them in large concrete bays, and I would come home so drenched in mud that you couldn't tell my hard hat color. Got moved into sanitation BC, my trainer didn't like me and left. Story 24. I was an RA in a dorm, and they made us clean the rooms on the last day of school when all the students left. Why they could not hire custodial is beyond me. And some guy left like a ridiculous amount of trash and old clothes and stuff. But underneath his bed were around 24 plastic water bottles with cum in them. I reported it to my boss, and he was like, "That's not what that is, stop being dramatic." So I brought in my boyfriend, and he agreed that these were 100% bottles of old cum. I didn't want to be fired, so I cleaned them, before tweeting angrily at the school. All I got was an apology. Story 25. Handed out flyers on the street on a rare sunny UK Saturday. Got the gig from a friend for a pop-up tent shilling overpriced skincare and makeup from an unknown brand. I was told it was for a fashion shoot, and definitely didn't expect to be bugging people with crap. The organizers were watching us intently to make sure we bothered every single person that walked past us on the narrow sidewalk. I hated myself for it, but I was a poor international student and was too polite to say, "Fuck no, never again." I'm not entirely convinced it wasn't some sort of MLM that this lady got sucked into and that she was really just using us to bump her side hustle while a fashion shoot was actually happening somewhere else. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. Be sure to write comments and share your stories.